So we're looking at our lives through the lens of what God has done for us, and through the gospel. All through the book of Romans, we interacted with the gospel and what Christ did for us and how God rescued us through Jesus Christ. And now we want to look at specific areas of our life and say, how does the gospel inform that? How does the gospel shape what I think and do in different areas of my life and different perspectives? And we've come to money, which is like a pastor's poison, like good luck with that. And so I thought, you know what, instead of, actually after the sermon last week, Daylin and I often, I was just pointing, but that's Katie, that's not Daylin. Daylin and I often talk over a sermon, and I said, I felt like I was talking a lot and I didn't have illustrations and stories. And I know for myself, when someone just kind of lectures a long time, it's like I have a very short attention span, but when I'm told stories, I can listen for hours. We go to the movie theaters and watch a Star Wars movie for 2.5 hours, and we're like, yeah, that was fun, that was no problem. So I want to look at this through the lens of a story where God gives us practical illustration. In 1 Timothy 6, probably is, for me, one of the most important passages. When I think about money and I think about finances, 1 Timothy 6 defines it for me. Paul is warning his mentor, or is it called a mentee? I don't know what the other way. It's a mentor and mentee. We'll say it is, yeah. He's warning his mentee that as a pastor, he's got to watch out for greed, watch out for wanting material possessions and wanting riches. And so he says, godliness, in 1 Timothy 6:6, godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of the world. But if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. And then he says, those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. Could he have used stronger language? I mean, when he is warning Timothy about the dangers of this desire to be rich, he says it's a temptation, it's a snare, it will pull you senseless and harmful desires that will plunge people into ruin and destruction. And then verse 10, the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith, and it is through this craving that some have pierced themselves through with many pangs. So, we could expound that. We can talk about each of those things, the temptation and the snare and the pangs and the sorrow and the pain that Paul is warning Timothy comes when, and he kind of, there's a progression. There's a desire to be rich, and then he talks, or a desire for riches, and then he talks about a love of riches, and then he talks about a craving for riches. And that's often the way it happens in our hearts and in our lives. Like I said, I could lecture you about that for 30 minutes or 40 minutes, but I want to look at it through two people's lives. So if you turn back to Genesis 13. We have the story of Abraham and Lot. God told Abraham to leave his family, and I think it was not God's desire, but Abraham brought Lot with him. And so he and Lot were together, and Lot was kind of like the son that Abraham never had or didn't have. And so Lot was kind of Abraham's first attempt at having his own son. And then Ishmael comes, which is another attempt at Abraham having his own son. And then finally Isaac comes. But in Genesis 13, Abraham has just wandered away from God. Genesis 12 is a hugely important chapter in Abraham's life. God has established a covenant with Abraham, and you're like, wow, things are going great. And then at the second half of Genesis 12, Abraham doesn't trust God and walks away from God and takes things into his own hands. And it's constantly a battle with Abraham, is doing it himself or trusting God to take care of him. So he's just had a huge setback. He's just wandered away from God and gone outside of God's will at the end of chapter 12. And then look how it's chapter 13. It says, so Abraham went up from Egypt, where he was never supposed to be, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him, into the Negeb. Now Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. And he journeyed on from the Negeb as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning. between Bethel and Ai, to the place where he had made an altar at the first, and there Abram called upon the name of the Lord. And I love that. If we just try to get inside Abraham's shoes and sit with him and think, what is he thinking, what is he feeling? Have you been at that place where you have wandered away from God and you're far away from where you know you're supposed to be? And often what we do is we say, where's the last place I knew God? Where's the last place I know that I was walking with God? And whether it's physically we move there or emotionally and spiritually we go back there, it seems like Abraham is coming back to a place where he says, I was walking with God between Bethel and Ai where I built that altar, and he takes him and his family and Lot and everybody. He goes back to that place and he again calls on the name of the Lord in that place. It's like he restores his relationship with God there. And then it says, verse 5, and Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, so that the land could not support both of them dwelling together. For their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together, and there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. At that time the Canaanites and the Perizzites were dwelling in the land. Then Abram said to Lot, let there be no strife between you and me, and between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, for we are kinsmen. Is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left, then I will go to the right. If you take the right hand, I will go to the left. Now look at verse 10. As the chapter unfolds, verse 10 is important. It says, and Lot lifted up his eyes and saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt in the direction of Zoar. And then in parentheses, at least in the ESV it's in parentheses, this was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So as Moses is writing this account, he's you know the literary device foreshadowing, where you tell about something that's going to come that hasn't happened yet, and you're trying to inform the reader. As we're reading through here, Lot's going this direction, and even before anything happens, Moses is just going to put in your head, now this is the place that the Lord is later going to destroy. Which, I guess if there was a score to the story, this would be the minor track. I'm speaking out of my expertise. But isn't the minor track the one you use to kind of tell people it's ominous, there's danger, there's a problem here? So the minor track is, this was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot, what's that? The jaw, yeah. So Lot chose for himself. Again, notice this language. Lot lifted up his eyes. Lot chose for himself all the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed east. Thus they separated from each other. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the valley and moved his tent as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom, again Moses is going to give a spiritual evaluation of this decision. The men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. So here's our first point. Lot does not consider the spiritual danger. Lot makes this decision based on the financial opportunity. And it's easy to cluck our tongues. I'm using all these phrases, and I have no idea if they're the right phrases. It's easy to look at Lot from the distance of 2,000, 4,000, 6,000 years and say, oh my goodness, Lot. I'm so disappointed in you. You didn't even consider the spiritual ramifications of your career decision. All you thought about was the financial opportunity. You saw the green grass, you saw the water, you saw the opportunities for you to grow richer, and you made a career decision based only on the financial perspective. We, in the 21st century Christians, we never do that. Whenever a job opportunity comes before us, the very first thing we do is say, what is the spiritual ramifications of this? What will happen to my family spiritually if I take this job or move to this post or take this? I guess Army, you don't really take a promotion. You're just given a promotion. But don't we do the same thing time after time after time? Career decisions, 99% of the time, are about money. They're about advancement. They're about what's best for me. How can I get ahead? What will be best for my career? What will be best for promotions? What will look good on my resume? And yet we see Lot making decisions based often on the exact same criteria that we make decisions on. He's saying, where can my herd grow? Where is water? Where is grass? Where can I prosper and succeed? Which is so many times exactly the questions we're asking, exactly the perspective that we have. And we don't think till after, if we think at all, about what's going to happen to my family? What's going to happen to me? What's the spiritual temperament and environment of where I'm taking my family and where I'm going? How is this going to impact me spiritually? That is faith. We talk over and over, faith is vision. Faith is being able to see not just green grass and water, but faith is being able to see more than that. Faith is being able to see beyond that, to say, if I go there, yes, there's green grass, yes, there's water, yes, there's opportunity for growth and success and advancement, but there are also wicked people all around me. I'm moving my family into a wicked place, and I am putting myself under the impression and the influence of wicked people. So Lot does not consider the spiritual danger. He sees the financial opportunity and he moves forward towards it. But then look at verse 14. The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, lift up your eyes. Remember what I told you to pay attention to back in verse 10. And Lot lifted up his eyes. Now, it's not Abram lifting up his eyes, but God lifting up Abram's eyes. Now, God says, lift up your eyes. And remember back with Lot, it says, Lot chose for himself in verse 11. Look at verse 15, verse 16, verse 17. One phrase over and over and over. Verse 14, lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land that you see, I will give to you and to your offspring forever. Verse 16, I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth. So that if one can count the dust of the earth, your offspring also can be counted. Verse 17, arise, walk through the length and the breadth of the land, for I will give it to you. And then verse 18, so Abram moved his tent and came and settled by the oaks of Mamre, which are at Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. You see the sandwich? Verse 4, what is Abram doing? Calling on the name of the Lord. Verse 18, what is Abram doing? Building an altar to the Lord. Do you see the difference? We're being told a story, but stories are not just told to give us information. The Old Testament is not just written so that we know what happened to Lot and Abraham. It's written to teach us about what happened to Lot and Abram. I know I'm saying Abraham half the time and Abram half the time. You just have to forgive me. I'm sorry for that. At this point, it's still Abram. What is Moses? What is God by the Holy Spirit teaching us? He's saying these are two people. These are two paths. These are two ways of living. Lot chooses for himself and lifts up his own eyes and looks for his own opportunities and goes after them and takes them because they're good for him financially. Abram is calling on the name of the Lord and is building an altar to the Lord. Abram's eyes are on God. And God is saying, I will give to you. I will make of you. I will give to you. Who do you trust to take care of you? When you put your head down on the pillow at night, what guarantees you that you're going to be okay? A lot of people love the army, not because of the field duties and not because of the 3 a.m., 4 a.m. wake-ups, but a lot of people love the army because of the security that you get from the army, that you have a job and they will take care of you. And there's a trap there. There's a spider web where it pulls you in and pulls you in, and you get more stuck and more stuck inside of it. Of saying, we will provide for you. We will take care of you. You are going to be okay because we will give you a paycheck, and then after you've served X amount of years, we will give you retirement. So sleep easy. It's all going to be okay. That is not a Christian's calling. That is not where we get our security from. That is not what our faith is in. Abram is calling on the name of the Lord. Abram is building an altar to the Lord. Abram is looking to his God to give him, to make of him, and to give him. So it doesn't take long for Lot plan to unravel. If you turn over to chapter 14, the first 7 verses we're not going to read through, except I want to point out to you, Genesis is the first book of the Bible. That's probably new information for you. I don't know if you've ever heard that before, but you heard it here from High Point. Genesis is the first book of the Bible. So all the things in Genesis, you get all these first. The first time the Bible addresses this. The first time the Bible says this. Genesis 14 is the first time in all of Scripture you're going to read the word king, and you're going to read the word king about 45 times as you go through this chapter. It's this king, 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 this king. And they're listed and named, and you're stumbling over the word king over and over and over and over again as you read through there. You can just glance through the first 7 verses. And when you think king, don't think like, the king of France or the king of Spain, these huge like monarchs over a region. This is thousands of years before Christ. We're thinking like city-states or tribal leaders. A king is someone who is the ruler of a limited domain. You're over a city or over a tribe, and you become the king. As they're using the word king here in Genesis 14, the kings are rulers over tribes or cities, like Sodom, for example. So there's 4 kings, and the main king you see right there in verse 1, I have no idea how to pronounce this. They don't teach you this in Bible college. But let's call him Chedorlaomer. That, okay? So you've got that king. And he has 3 other kings that are kind of in an alliance with him. And then there are 5 kings who are kind of paying tribute to him. If you know history, you know this is how it worked. I won't come destroy you as long as you pay me money. So there's 5 kings paying tribute to mostly Chedorlaomer and his other allied kings. And these 5 kings say, you know what, there's 5 of us, there's 4 of them, let's rebel, let's stop paying him his tribute money, let's rebel against this alliance of 4. So you basically have a war of 4 kings against 5 kings. The 4 kings have some battles, they win those battles, then they come down and they fight against the 5 kings, which is what you get into verses 8, 9, 10, and 11. You have this battle of the 4 kings coming down to, again, bring these 5 kings back into line, bring them back into submission, so that they're again paying tributes and taxes and all of that, not taxes, but tributes to these kings. And they defeat them. They win the war. The 4 kings win the war against the 5 kings. And it's interesting as it goes through there, you're just reading along and it's just information. But then look at verse 10. The valley of Siddim was full of bitumen pits. As the king of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some fell into them, and the rest fled to the hill country. Has nothing to do with the story. It's just as he's telling the story, he tells you about these pits that people weren't paying attention, were running, and they fell into them. For the longest time, it was just like, okay, thank you. I guess that's helpful to know. But one of the keys of telling a story is the action of the story also informs the lesson of the story. So here, just as he's telling, hey, some of the kings weren't paying attention and they fell into pits as they were running away. One of the things he's getting you to think about is when you don't pay attention to what's happening, you fall into pits and into traps. It's dangerous to run around and not look at where you're going, which is going to come into play in about 2 verses here. So the king of Sodom was one of the 5 kings who lost to the 4 kings. The 4 kings take these kings, they take the people, they take the possessions, and they go. That's the way slavery would work. You would win a battle, you would take the people and say, okay, now you will work for me. Now you are my slaves. And so they took Lot, they took all of Lot's family, they took all of Lot's possessions, and they took them back as loot from the war that they had won. Then look at verse 13. One who had escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew. Notice, not Abram the king, Abram the Hebrew, who was living by the oaks of Mamre the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and Aner. These were the allies of Abram. So Abram had his own allies. Abram, Eshcol, Aner, and Mamre. When Abram heard that his kinsman had been taken captive, Lot, he led forth his trained men born in his house, 318 of them, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. And he divided his forces against them by night, he and his servants. And let me stop there for a second. We kind of read that and are like, yeah, that makes sense. You attack at night. That's a good time to attack. That's not a good time to attack in this time of the world. Thucydides, I got to read his history of the Peloponnesian Wars, and he talks about a nighttime battle. And there aren't, what are the vision goggles? Yeah, there aren't glasses that help you see at night. There aren't radios to talk to each other and make sure who is who and who's attacking from what perspective and what direction. So Thucydides talks about someone had this bright idea, like, let's attack at night. They'll never expect it. They attacked at night, and they ended up killing more of each other, more of their own soldiers than they did of the enemy, because no one knew who was who. No one knew whether they were attacking or defending. They're all coming in, and there's no way to communicate. There's no way to tell enemy from foe. What's the word? Friend. There's no way to tell friend from foe. And so more of the attacking army killed from fighting each other than from fighting the enemy. And then you read this, and you see Abram goes, he divides up his army, and he attacks at nighttime, which is a risky, brave, courageous, sometimes stupid thing to do. And yet he said, from what we can tell, this is a tribesman, Abram, with a few of his allies, 318 men, against 4 kings and their soldiers who have just won not one war, but 2 wars. These are trained, experienced fighting men. Abram goes because they have his nephew Lot. He divides up his army. He attacks them at night. And look what it says. He went forth with his trained men. He divided his army against them by night, he and his servants, and he defeated them and pursued them to Hobah, north of Damascus. Then he brought back all the possessions and also brought back his kinsman Lot with all of his possessions and the women and the people. So, I mean, again, like, get into this story. I don't know, probably not a horse, maybe a camel. Abram is riding back into town like as bad a man as there is around. 4 kings have just defeated 5 kings, and then Abram went and defeated 4 kings, defeated their armies, took back all of these possessions, took back all of these people, and now he's riding back into town like, were you guys missing some people? Because I found them. You know those 4 kings that just beat you? I just went and destroyed them, and I got all your stuff back for you. So he rides back into town. It's not a Western, but you understand. Verse 17. After his return from the defeat of Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Shaveh. That is what? The king's valley. Now you got to see what's happening here. Abram is this new guy in town. How is he going to interact? What's his place going to be in society? To this point, he's just been like the new guy, that guy over there by Mamre's trees. And now all of a sudden, he has just beaten the kings who beat you. He has just rescued all the people that belong to you. He has just brought back all of the possessions that they stole from you. So the king of Sodom, you can almost see him like, this is the guy I want to know. This is the guy we need to form an alliance with. Let's get Abram into our 5-king alliance and make it a 6-king alliance, and we'll be good to go. So he sends messengers and he says, why don't you come meet me in the king's valley? I'm gonna elevate you, and you can talk to the kings in the king's valley. So Abram is called out to the king's valley. We're going to jump down to verse 21. And the king of Sodom said to Abram, give me the persons, but take the goods for yourself. Now that seems like a generous offer. That seems like a person who's thankful and gratitude and like, wow, that's really nice. Look how he offered all that stuff to Abram. But there's a trap. Remember what happens to people when you run around without paying attention to where you're going? You fall into pits. So here's Abram being met by the king of Sodom. Wow, are we that far behind on the notes? I'm sorry. Abram's eyes are on God. God shows Abram that he will give him, or what he will give him. The king of Sodom is not just trying to be nice, is not just trying to be thankful. There's a trap here. There's a spider web here. There's an alliance. The king of Sodom is not just saying, hey, thanks a lot. Why don't you keep that stuff for yourself? As I thought about it, have you guys seen the old mobster movies? You know, where there's like this Italian mob boss and you're in trouble and the Italian mob boss does something really nice for you and you're like, wow, that's cool. That guy's a really nice guy. And you think it's like a no strings attached offer or a no strings attached gift. And then inevitably what happens after the Italian mob boss does this really nice thing for you? What does he do? He comes back to return the favor. At some point, he calls in the nice deed that he did for you. At some point, it's like, hey, you remember I helped you with this? Now it's your turn. You get to help me with this. And without knowing it, you think you're just accepting a gift, but what you're actually doing is you are forming a partnership. You are getting into an alliance with the Italian mob boss. And in a sense, that's what's happening here. The king of Sodom says, Abram, come to the King's Valley. Abram, keep all of that stuff for yourself. It's my gift to you. Abram, we are now allied together. We are now partners. We are now working together. You and me, we have a formal relationship with each other. And you see, Abram is not just a king running around not knowing where he's going. Abram's not going to fall into this pit. Look at his response. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted my hand to the Lord, God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, that I would not take a thread or a sandal strap or anything that is yours, lest you should say, I have made Abram rich. I will take nothing but what the young men have eaten and the share of the men who went with me. Let Honor, Eshcol, and Mamre take their share. You see what Abram's saying? Abram has the faith and the vision to say, I see what's happening here. I know what's going on. I am not going to let you give me this gift and then go around saying, oh yeah, Abram, yeah, he's doing pretty well. You know who gave him all that stuff. You know how he got all those riches. You know who is his sponsor, who is the one who took him under his wing. Me, the king of Sodom. I am the one who has made Abram rich. I am the one who has taken care of Abram. It's Lot played out all over again. What happened to Lot? He saw the financial opportunity, he paid no attention to the spiritual dangers, and he moved all the way into the city of Sodom. In chapter 14, we've already seen that is causing Lot problems. Lot has put his family and himself in danger because he's not paying attention. Now, as you're reading this, the idea is you see, oh no, the king of Sodom is now coming for Abram. It's not just Lot who's been caught in this trap. Now Abram's going to get caught in the trap. The king of Sodom is offering Abram all of these riches. And again, it's easy to kind of look back and be like, well, I would have done the same thing. You know, I wouldn't have taken that gift either. But we're talking probably about equivalent to a multi-million-dollar offer here. Saying, you know what? It's all yours. This is yours. All you have to do is take it. All you have to do is sign on the line. All you have to do is get into a partnership with me, and you will be rich beyond your wildest dreams. Have you ever had an offer like that? Maybe not multi-million, but an offer where you have to swallow really hard, and you have to think, wow, that would make life easy. I would be on the golden street. Everything would be taken care of. And all I have to do is blank. And here's Abram. All of these riches are pushed to him. All of this offer is given to him. And his response is, I will not take a cent from you. I will not even take a shoestring from you. Because if I do, everyone's going to hear that you are the one who made me rich. And what's the problem with the king of Sodom taking credit for making Abram rich? Whose eyes are, are Abram's eyes on? Come on. Abram's eyes are on God. Abram's eyes. Remember chapter 13. He called on the name of the Lord. He's sacrificing to God. Abram knows where his bread is buttered. Abram knows who has taken care of him. Abram knows who is going to give him everything, who is going to make him everything. So this is a point where it's deciding, am I going to take the gold that's sitting right in front of me, or am I going to take a God who offers more than that to me? But I can't grab it, I can't hold it, I can't touch it. You know what Jesus Christ said about this decision? You cannot serve what? Two masters. You either love the one and hate the other, or you will cling to the one and despise the other. Jesus said God and possessions and riches and security and financial opportunities, they are vying for the same place in your heart. Let's say that again. God and riches are vying for the same place in your heart. Your heart is not big enough for both of them. You will make room for one or the other. You will put one in place and you will push one to the side. Jesus says you will make room for finances and riches and you will push God to the side, or you will make room for God and you will push finances and riches to the side of your heart. Now that's not to say that if you're rich, you're a sinner. If you're rich, you've pushed God out of the way. Because what does chapter 13 say about Abram in verse 2? That Abram was not just rich, it says he is very rich. So rich that he and Lot can't even stay in the same place together. It is not, if you're rich, you love money. If you're poor, you love God. There are poor people who love money just as much as the rich people. And there are rich people who love God more than as much as any poor person. The issue is the heart. What do you desire? What do you love? What do you crave? Lot is a picture of someone who's desiring, loving, and craving financial peace, security, opportunities. Abram is a picture of someone whose eyes are on God. You have given to me, you have made me, you have given to me, and I will not let the king of Sodom take credit for what God has done. I will not let the king of Sodom come in and give me this stuff and then say, I made Abram rich. Because then the glory that belongs to God goes to this wicked man. How did Abram make such a great decision? When millions of dollars are shoved Abram's way, what gave him the fortitude? What gave him the clarity to say, I will not take even a sandal from you? How did Abram see that trap? And more importantly, how did he see it? How did he escape from that trap? How did his desire for goods and for money not take over like it does with me so often? His focus is on God. And you know why his focus is on God, Tina? The 4 verses we skipped. So the king of Sodom says, Abram, come to the King's Valley. Come meet with me. Let's have a talk. It's about time we get to know each other. So the king of Sodom goes out, Abram comes out, and God sends someone else. This is so cool. God cares about Abram. God cares about Abram. Abram is part of God's plan. And so there's a sense where God says, I'm not going to let you mess up here. He sends Melchizedek. This is the first time we read Melchizedek's name. This is going to be the last time we read Melchizedek's name until Hebrews, exactly. Until way later, someone's going to come back and say, hey, he's going to point to this very story. This is the only time we read Melchizedek, the king of what? Salem. which is probably where we get later on Jerusalem. A lot of people make that connection of this is probably the same kind of area and location as later on where you get the name Jerusalem. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, and as you're reading this story, it ought to be like, what? I've read 5 kings and 4 kings, 5 kings and 4 kings, 5 kings and 4 kings, and none of them are Melchizedek. And then Abram is called to the king's valley, and one more king shows up. One more king, Melchizedek, the king of Salem. And who is Melchizedek, the king of Salem? What does Moses tell us? He is a priest of the Most High God. God sends a representative to the king's valley. God sends someone to say, hey, someone needs to talk to Abram before Abram talks to the king of Sodom. Someone needs to put my words in Abram's ears. Someone needs to put my truth in Abram's heart. So God sent Melchizedek to remind Abram of truth. God rescues and protects his servant as he heads toward this trap. Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. Again, do you see the imagery here? What do we use at the Lord's table? Bread and wine. Unless you're a Baptist, then we can't use wine. But I mean, here, the imagery is Melchizedek comes and he brings bread and wine. And then it says, he was the priest of the Most High God. And he blessed him. Melchizedek blesses Abram and says, blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. Now, go back to the account of the war, okay? Verse 14, when Abram heard that his kinsmen had been taken captive, he led forth his trained men, born in his house, 318 of them, went in pursuit as far as Dan. He divided his forces against them by night, he and his servants, and defeated them and pursued them to Hobah, north of Damascus. It'd be so easy for Abram to be like, hold on. God wasn't the one who chased those armies. God wasn't the one who divided and came up with the master strategy that I came up with. God wasn't the one who took the courageous step to attack at nighttime with divided forces. God wasn't the one who got the victory. That was Abram. I did that. I led my men. I achieved that victory. And what is God reminding Abram of? My hands are all over your story. My hands are the ones. The reason you didn't kill more of yourselves than the enemy is because my hands were on your men as they fought. My hands were directing you as you went. My hands were blessing you with what you've got and what you've done. God sent Melchizedek to remind Abram of truth. The very first thing, notice how he addresses God. Blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. Do you think Abram was paying attention? Look at what Abram says to the king of Sodom. I have lifted my hand to the Lord, who? God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. Is that not beautiful? Abram is quoting the sermon he just heard. Abram is quoting to the king of Sodom what the king of Salem has just told him. God Most High is possessor of heaven and earth. God is possessor of everything, which is kind of a two-sided truth. On the one side, God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, I think it says in the Psalms. God has all the resources you will ever need. If you want someone to take care of you that is more reliable than the army, if you can imagine that. Someone more reliable than the army is God, the possessor of heaven and earth. So the truth, on the one hand, is God has everything you will ever need. God owns everything you could ever possibly need. God possesses it. The other side of that truth is, guess what falls into heaven and earth? Everything you own. Everything I own. Melchizedek is telling Abram, God doesn't just own everything on heaven and earth, he also owns everything you own is actually not yours. Everything you claim for yourself is actually belongs to who? God. It is God's. It is all God's. Everything we have belongs to God. And then the second truth, blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. God has blessed us with whatever we have. And all that we have has been given to us by God. It belongs to God, and He has given it to us, on the one hand, to richly enjoy. One of the things 1 Timothy 6 says is, tell those who are rich in this present world not to trust in uncertain riches, but to trust in the living God who has given them all things to richly enjoy. So the things that God has given to you, He wants you to enjoy them. You don't need to go around with a whip and beat yourself and say, I'm such a bad person because I have this and I have that, and I feel so guilty because this person in this country doesn't have what I have. God has given you that, and He's given you permission to enjoy that. To enjoy the house you have, to enjoy the career you have, to enjoy the car you drive. But also to use for His purposes. 1 Timothy 6 goes on to say, teach them to be ready to give and willing to share. So we hold everything we have with open hands. Because it belongs to God anyway, and God has given it to us, and if God takes it from us, the first song we sang, blessed be your name. In the land that is plentiful, thank you, God, for all the things you've put in my hands. And when He takes things out of our hands, thank you, God. You own everything on heaven and earth. When you want to put it back in my hands, that's up to you. Our eyes are on you, not on our stuff. Our hands are open. They're not tightly clung around what we have earned and made and scratched out for ourselves. So how does Abram respond after Melchizedek teaches him these two truths? God is the possessor of heaven and earth, and everything you have, God has blessed you with. What is Abram's response at the end of verse 20? Abram gave him a tenth of everything. Firsts, right? First time we hear the word king in the Bible. First time we hear Melchizedek's name. The first time we hear this concept. Abram says, everything belongs to God. Everything I have has been given to me by God. And his response is to give Melchizedek a tenth of everything. Do you know what we call a tenth? Same exact word. Abram responds by giving a tithe. What's interesting is there's no law. The law came to Moses. Moses is going to come 400, 500 years after this. There's no law that says, Abram, when God gives you something, you have to give a tenth back to God. This isn't because Abram says, I have to. This isn't because Melchizedek said, you ought to or you have to. You notice Melchizedek didn't say anything about what he ought to give to him. Melchizedek says, Abram, everything you have is God's. Everything you have is from God. And Abram responds by giving a tithe to God. So I'm working through this sermon this week and thinking through all of this. And usually by Wednesday, I kind of have a pretty good idea of where the sermon's going to go. And I start to get excited about sermons. Like I think about them. And when I'm not at the office and when I'm eating or when I'm driving, my mind is just chewing on the sermon like, oh yeah, I could talk about this and I could talk about that. And this week, it was dead in the water. As soon as I closed the Bible and wasn't looking at this specific passage, I stopped thinking about it. I stopped chewing on it. I stopped going here. And on Wednesday or Thursday, I started praying, God, I am not excited about this. I don't want to think about it. I'm avoiding sermon prep. What's going on? And it's not easy to talk about money because you all think I'm just after your money. And so I have that knowledge in the back of my head, but that's not what it was. It was something different. And it is amazing how separate, what's the word I'm looking for? The dichotomies that we can make in our lives. You know what else was going on this week? You know what else I was struggling and wrestling with this week? It's the first of the month, and we usually get paid around the first of the month. Got paid a couple days after the first of the month, and less money came in than I was expecting. And we just went on vacation last month, so I'm just being honest with you, okay? You know what happens when you go on vacation? You have the credit card bills that you need to pay off after vacation, and less money comes in, and I'm wrestling with that, and guess where my mind goes to solve this financial problem that I'm facing? Man, 10% would really help me cover some of the bills I've got left over from vacation. That tithe, because as soon as the money comes in, we start putting it, putting in this savings, putting it towards this, putting it towards that, putting it to tithe. And immediately, my heart said, I can't afford to tithe this month. I don't have the money. Not enough came in for me to tithe. That 10% is missing somewhere. So you'll understand, God, right? And can you imagine, I am having this wrestling match at the same time I am preparing a sermon on tithing and on giving and on our finances and who we look to and who we trust in. And I'm almost pulling it off simultaneously. I am that two-minded that in my own heart and my own life, I can be struggling and saying, I don't think we can afford to tithe. Now, how do I convince Duane of that? And on this side, I'm putting a sermon together, and I'm thinking through, and I'm wondering, why am I not passionate about this? Why is this not gripping my heart? Why is this not something that I am thinking about? Because my heart wasn't there. My heart was saying, when push comes to shove, I've got to take care of my bills. I can't afford to do that this month. I have to pay this, and I have to pay that, and I need money for this, and I need money for that. There's not enough to give God 10% this time. So how could I justify it? How can I explain it? How can I convince Duane that this is the right thing to do this month? And then at some point, these two separate train tracks collide with each other. And I start to think, man, who am I trusting in? Who are my eyes? What are my eyes on? Am I Abram or am I Lot? I am Lot. I am looking at budgets and I'm looking at numbers and I'm looking at finances and saying, I can afford to do this and I can't afford to do that. And God challenging me to say, can you trust me or not? Am I big enough or not? Is this about numbers or is this about me? To where I get to the point of saying, okay, God, I believe you. I believe that you are the possessor of heaven and earth. I believe that you have blessed me with everything I have. And not because there's a law telling me I have to. Not because I have to write and explain my finances to anyone. No one asks me if I tithe. No one checks up on me. It's between me and Duane and God. And yet God brought me back to the point of saying, okay, God, you are big enough to handle this. You've given me what I have. I'm going to trust you to give me what I need. So with that confession, can I finish with this question? Do you give a tithe? Abram saw God. He saw God as the possessor of heaven and earth. He saw God as the blesser of everything he had. And his heartfelt response to that truth was giving a tithe. So there's two questions. Do you give a tithe? Does your heart respond the same way his did? And then why or why not? Because just giving it isn't enough. If you're giving a tithe because somehow you think you're buying God off, you think God will love you if you give, God won't love you if you don't, that's not the gospel. The beauty of the gospel is God loves you. Full stop. You don't give a tithe, guess what? God still loves you. God doesn't hold his approval or his love or his salvation over you saying, keep jumping, you'll get it. Keep giving and you'll reach it. God gives it to you freely. The same way he gave to Abram freely. And then we respond to God's love. We freely respond back to a God who has freely given to us. So maybe your answer is, yes, I give a tithe. And then why? Because I have to. Because it's the law. And I'm here to tell you that's wrong. Yeah. God has freely given to you. And giving a tithe should not be about keeping a law. Giving a tithe should be about, I see God as the possessor of everything that's out there and everything that's in here. And I see God as the blesser of everything I have. So it's not just the 10%, it's the other 90% as well that we answer to God for. We don't buy God off with 10% hush money of like, this is yours, now leave me alone, the rest is mine. Everything we have is God's. Everything you own is God's. What are you doing with it? How are you using it? What are you investing God's money in? How are you using God's possessions? Trying to be very open and honest. I need this sermon probably more than most of you did.